Week podcast. Ryan Ray alongside the one and only Dr. Energy herself, Ellen Wald. Ellen, how is it going today?
It's fantastic. Everything
Yeah.
is amazing except for
Well,
the Celtics, which
yeah,
are
except for the
trying to break
Celtics.
my heart.
That's depressing. That's just depressing. The only solace is that the Lakers lost to the Suns this weekend, and so that made my heart smile. Um,
Did you see? I saw this online, but did you see there was some pass that uh
oh, LeBron?
yeah, and he just
Yeah.
like he like threw it into the like it
Yeah.
hit what did it bounce off the post or something?
Right. Yeah. Oh man, that was hilarious. So, no, that was good to see. Good to see LeBron struggling. I feel bad for him. Not really. Um, but yeah, our Celtics, it's not looking like they're going to turn it around like I had hoped for them to. But we
Hmm,
will see. We will see.
you never
We got a
know.
lot to get into. And real quick, just a note to the listeners, Ellen. We were talking offline. We have a couple of travel things coming up. So we will be here for sure next week. And then after that, the 18th and 25th, those weeks, we might have some irregular release dates or might have to miss a show. But anyways, got some travel issues that might conflict with the show. We will be back to regular schedule hopefully after that. And then the baby's due, Ellen. The baby is, we are 6 weeks out.
Oh
So
my gosh,
yeah,
that is exciting.
yeah, baby Piper is close
You
to
were
being.
going to say we should have a contest for what the baby's name's going to be, but I guess
I've blown that, didn't I? I
blew
missed
that.
that. Sorry. So, okay. Speaking of blowing stuff up, let's go to energy transfer, gas rupture, caps,
Oh God.
baseline capacity. That's an awkward transition to say the least. From Bloomberg, the good news here, at least according to this report, is no one was seriously injured. Sometimes these things blow up, man, and it could be catastrophic. So that's a positive. Ellen, what are your takeaways from this piece?
Yeah, every time you hear about a pipeline disaster, it's so disconcerting because the truth is that we all live near all sorts of different pipelines,
Mm-hmm.
and we spend a lot of time also on this podcast talking about how much safer pipelines are than rail transport or truck
Mm-hmm.
transport
Mm-hmm.
for oil. This is obviously for a gas pipeline. I don't know. No one transports natural gas by train, right? They don't liquefy it and then
Mm-hmm.
stick it on a train, do they?
Right.
I know that the big liquefaction things are called trains, but they're
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
not
Right.
rail cars.
Right.
But so it's really difficult, I think, for it's very difficult for the pipeline PR when these kinds of things happened. Obviously, this is very it was very good that no one was injured, but at the same time, it does bring home the fact that although pipelines are definitely safer than other ways of transporting fuel, they're not without their issues. I was kind of interested in this because a while back I was watching some, they have these like competitions where businesses can come and like pitch, do these like pitch contests and get stuff. So this one was through the Wall Street Journal. And there was this company, and there were a lot of companies, and I watched like the whole thing. And there were a lot of companies that weren't all that impressive, but one of them had developed this kind of special camera that detected leaks for natural gas pipelines.
Mm-hmm.
And reading this article made me wonder, like, what happened to that company? Like, this was several years ago, so like, what happened to them? I think they won the competition, and I really wonder, what happened to them? Because their whole point was still like you install these cameras and they can detect any kinds of leaks like this. And I was really kind of wondering, well, like, what happened to them? Because it seems like that might be a really good technology to prevent or to stop these kinds of things from becoming as bad as this one was.
Yeah. You know, this is the part of the industry that I think probably gets overlooked because it's not the big sexy headline grabber until something bad happens. So if you think about the news we're talking about, and we have an article here in a minute, we're talking about pipeline being built. We don't talk about pipelines being maintenance. And inside the industry, they don't, which means they don't get a lot of budget. Their budget constraints are different than capital projects. I know we have talked to companies in the past about offering some services, not cameras, but using satellite imagery and various multi-hyperspectral sensors and all that junk to detect stuff. And the cost was more than what they were paying for. And they just don't have the budget only built in. And, when we were looking at some of those products, I kind of equated it to like selling flood insurance because, you don't want to buy flood insurance. But if your house floods, you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do now, right? And so they didn't. A lot of the companies weren't really saying, hey, we want to buy this extra service because they have a system. It does work. It's not the most effective, but the people inside the companies, you feel bad for them because they're constrained by the budget that they're dealt with. And so I think that's, to me, why I've dealt with that part of the industry is it feels more like kind of the flood insurance. We got procedures, we got policies. They work for the most part. To go and expend more money, well, we don't really want to take that kind of risk because we kind of have it under control. At least we think we do now.
It's really interesting that analogy because down here in Florida, flood insurance is basically like they're constantly pushing it because you get a hurricane and flooding and you can only get flood insurance. There's only one, you get a flood insurance policy. It's from the government. There's only one. And every year our flood insurance policy comes and we're like, oh, well, are we going to renew our flood insurance? Well, yeah, because you get flood damage. Or the interesting thing about flood insurance is if your roof blows off in a storm, but you got flood damage because your roof blew off and then it rained inside your house, insurance won't cover the water damage. So flood insurance is supposed to cover that. So so they're always pushing flood insurance. They want everyone in Florida to have it. I can understand why, but that's the thing. Even if your house has never ever flooded, there's always that chance. And this does seem kind of like that. I mean, maybe but it's such an incident like this is still very damaging for the company. I mean, if you look at Energy Transfer's shares, they're down despite the fact that, well, I'd say no. I mean, natural gas doesn't work the same way crude oil does in terms of pricing, but but their shares are down and it doesn't look good. Plus, it disrupts the flow of gas and it doesn't look good for an industry that desperately needs to build more pipelines. And so, I also think that if people were more well-versed in the kinds of safeguards that were out there that maybe aren't being used, that they might feel more comfortable with pipelines and companies that are using. They might put pressure on the companies to go out and spend that money in maintenance that they're not willing to spend because the overall result might be more pipelines.
Right, and I think, and just to kind of circle back around, so the flood insurance analogy, I'm not saying that it's flood insurance in the fact that people are scamming folks, because like you're saying with a lot
flood insurance is not a scam.
No, well, I know, but you have to have it because, like you say, if the wind blows it off, and there's a lot of technical things. I'm just talking about the debate over need or not need, because you're right. It blows the roof off, then it rains. Like, well, that's flood insurance and it doesn't cover. That's the kind of scammy stuff I'm referring to. Just the risk reward. But the thing to remember, and I don't know, I don't have anything pulled up at the moment here, but if you start talking about the miles of pipe that these companies have, that's the issue, is that they have so many miles of pipe. And then if you're out in the Permian, you may have 3 to 4 pipes that your pipeline and Ellen's pipeline and Tom's pipeline and Bob's pipeline right there in the same adjacent right of ways or the same right of way depending on what's going on. And I think that's really where the problem is that it's that you say, well, we're going to increase and again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not any expert on the legal side of this, but I wonder if there's some trepidation in saying, you know what? Well, if we increase our surveillance or our ability to monitor for these 15 pipelines or this 15% of our pipelines, and this other 85%, this costs too much because we're talking about thousands and thousands of miles or hundreds and hundreds of miles or whatever it is. And then one of those those 85% blows. Do they open themselves up to more litigation by saying, well, guys, you knew this technology was available. You did it for 15%. So I'm not saying anyone's ever told me that or hinted that. I'm just curious because it is a volume thing. And sometimes we think of like the pipeline company that's mentioned here, which is Energy Transfer. We think of, well, you got the North Dakota pipeline, you got this pipeline. But in reality, they probably have thousands upon thousands of pipelines if you count even the ones that are just a few miles long.
I wonder if it's possible for companies to kind of pool their resources for this kind of surveillance in a
Hmm.
particular region. So, like you're saying, if the Permian's got tons of pipelines, I wonder if it's possible to work out a scheme whereby different companies can pool their financial resources in certain areas, say that are perhaps very dense,
Right.
or have higher population density than other areas.
Yep. That's
If a pipeline bursts in the middle of nowhere, yeah, it still sucks, but you're not really at risk for killing people.
right. Yep. I agree. Okay, let's go to Canada once again with our sad story of the day. Enbridge pipeline delayed 1 year. Big hit to Alberta oil industry, according to the Edmonton Journal. Ellen, poor Canada. They just can't get it together. It seems like.
Yeah, this is really not not good. Another blow for this. I mean, it's being pushed back, sorry, because the Minnesota permitting process won't be complete until November, and then they can't get federal permits until 60 days after that. So again, the United States is screwing over Canada.
Yeah. Well, don't tell Markham.
Yeah,
We haven't
it's
had him on.
it's interesting because it does. We've talked about the Rachel Notley, the
Hmm.
premier of Alberta, which is a province, not a state.
Not a state. Definitely
Not
not
a
a
state,
state.
definitely not a state. It's a province, and she's a premier, not a governor. She has this scheme to transport oil by rail, and more of these pipeline delays make her idea seem possibly more compelling. So I think we need to keep an eye on see on what happens with that, because if it is successful, it could be a new model for transporting oil, whereby the government kind of is almost renting the rail cars, renting the space on the railways, and is essentially like buying the oil from the companies and then it's going to sell it to the refineries. It's kind of, I mean, I don't really support government getting involved in that way, but I'm not Canadian. So if that's what Canadian business government relationship, if they're cool with that, it could be an interesting model, perhaps.
It's funny. I was reading the comments here where you were talking, and the fourth comment points out that Nolte's looking like a genius now for lining up all those tank cars. Someone is echoing your sentiment that maybe that of course it's an interesting debate in the comments as it always is over who's exactly at fault here. When will the news start to turn for our Canadian brothers and sisters? Because it just feels like they cannot get a leg up on this thing.
No. Well, hopefully soon.
Okay. Well, Ellen, you sent this article or these two articles here, and I got to say we'll take them separately because the second one on why renewables can't save the planet is has some interesting things. But you sent a piece here from EIA: nuclear reactor restarts in Japan, displacing LNG imports in 2019 is a great chart. Be sure for the listeners to go check it out if you have not seen that. It was issued on March 4th of this year, so well, I guess that's today. Now that I think about it. And I heard this rumbling. God, I don't remember what it was last year, Ellen. Maybe that Japan was going to start turning these back on. And we have to remember, we talk about Japan. They don't have. I don't know if they have any, but they don't have very limited amount of natural resources. So they're very dependent on importing stuff. And so it makes a lot of sense for them if they can keep the meltdowns in check to use nuclear because they're not dependent on it. And you say, well, not just from a standpoint of energy consumption, but it puts them in a lot of very interesting geopolitical predicaments, if you will, with some of their imports that they have to do from the Middle East.
Yeah, I thought this was really, really interesting. And I actually saw it only because you tweeted it. So follow Ryan, guys.
Hey, there we go.
Tweets interesting stuff. So you tweeted this, and I picked up on it, and I thought this was really, really interesting for two reasons. One is the nuclear issue, but the other is what it means for the natural gas market,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was also really interesting because, like you said, Japan doesn't have a whole lot of natural resources going for it. Its energy mix is kind of interesting. So if you look at the chart that they have here it's from the based on the IEA, the International Energy Agency's stuff. Which, by the way, for those who are interested in looking at different, energy breakdowns in various countries, the IEA has a really, really good resource for that. I don't have the link, but it's always good if you ever want to find out like basically anything. So they've got natural gas, coal, and nuclear were their big providers. Then hydro, not so much. Petroleum, not as much, although it did go up. And then what is it? Like petroleum and other liquids, and then other probably refers mostly to renewables, I guess. But so what's really interesting is after the Fukushima, so Japan was on this path to actually increase its nuclear energy footprint. So they were planning, I think, to build like they have, I think, 9 reactors right now, and they want to increase their they wanted to increase that to 30 by 2030. So that's a huge increase. So they really seem to want to increase the percentage. They want to bring their nuclear generation percentage up to like 20 to 22% of their total electricity generation. And I didn't write it down, but I looked up what the percentage of nuclear power generation in the US was. I know like what it is in like certain regions. I think in New England it's like 30% of in that region, because it varies based on region and utility and all that stuff. So but then after the Fukushima disaster, they basically took all their plants offline to check them out and do upgrades. But it's I don't know exactly how it all works, but my sense is that part of the issue is that Japan is not is not a seismically stable area. Right. So you can have a lot of safeguards and stuff, but part of it is also just that it's built in a seismically unstable area, and so you've got a lot of risks just due to that. So now, what's interesting is to see when they cut out their nuclear power generation, they really upped their LNG and their coal and their petroleum and fuel, petroleum footprint for generation, which is not good environmentally, although it's good to see that they up their natural gas more than others. So as they are now basically like ramping their nuclear power plants back up, which is supposed to, I think, be completed, it takes a while. It's not like flicking a switch. And like it seems to me, and I don't know this for a fact because I'm not an engineer, but it seems like with a natural gas turbine, you can just like feed it more natural gas and it makes more power. But with nuclear, you've got a certain amount of like capacity that can generate, and it's not just like flicking the switch and it all goes on. You got to ramp it up slowly, and it takes time to get to capacity. But apparently, by 2019 or by the end, they're supposed to be back running, and that means that they're going to decrease their natural gas imports, which have apparently mostly come from Australia. Interesting, huh?
Yeah, that is interesting. And you got the seismic issues for sure, but I know I'm probably a lot more optimistic on nuclear than most, but I mean, if Japan, just theoretically speaking, can get the nuclear up, no more major incidents, I think it's going to be something that internationally people are going to look at and say, you know what, if you have a country that's not rich with resources, this is the most viable way to go. And for them, again, it makes a lot of sense economically, but it also makes sense because some of their dealings, they're big allies with the U.S. in political things, but when you had to go and source your energy, you had to buy from folks that put you at odds with your allies. So I think that there's a lot at play here, but I think if they can get it done, other countries can look at this as a model. So, you know what, we might not have a lot of natural resources, and we might not have a lot of things to trade, but we can go with nuclear, and it's a very viable option. And it's, as we're talking about here in a second, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that nuclear is really, it gets a very bad rap. I mean, I know I was looking this up, like in the U.S., nuclear comprises 60% of our like emissionless energy.
Right.
Which is a huge amount, and hydro is the other big component. So, I think that, and especially like with all this Green New Deal stuff that we haven't totally sunk our teeth into on this podcast yet, but that is, I think that combined with Japan re-upping this and what's going on with Germany, and also this news that Saudi Arabia is looking to build nuclear power plants. Nuclear is really getting it's like getting a new look. It's like getting a fresh new look today, which is kind of interesting because every so often I do think that this happens. We're like, wait a minute, what about nuclear? Let's give another look. And it's a very reliable baseload provider. But I do think that there's one problem with thinking that nuclear can solve everything. And I guess that kind of like segues into the next article, which has been getting a lot of press. The only reason I included it was because I wanted us to discuss it. I don't necessarily agree with this guy, but he got a lot of press. He got a lot of for writing this article in something called Quillette, which I have other thoughts on that are not related to energy about the publication Quillette. But he also landed like segments on Fox News and other places. So I thought we should discuss it. It's called Why Renewables Can't Save the Planet. And I agree with a lot of what he has to say about why renewables can't save the planet. But his answer is totally nuclear.
Right.
And I'm not convinced that nuclear is the answer. I think that it's nuclear plus natural gas. I really see, I don't think that nuclear plus renewables can account for our electricity usage unless we vastly change our electricity, basically like cut our electricity usage massively, because you're still going to need to ramp up in these times of like in a cold snap or in a heat wave or just, if the sun's not shining, you're going to need to ramp up. And I think really still the only way to really do that is with natural gas. And I think you can see that by how much when Germany has tried to cut back its coal and its nuclear like at the same time.
Right.
And they built tons of wind farms and all that, but what did they really increase? Their natural gas use. So I think that we all know that really it's a combination of nuclear plus natural gas, but like we're not really willing to admit it.
I'm willing to admit it.
I'm willing to admit it too, but
and that's what's so frustrating about this conversation is it to me, and I know you're not saying this, Ellen, but to me, a lot of discussion around energy is cookie cutter, very, very much. Well, we have to do it this way, and for me, we met on the show. I had the Global Energy Leaders podcast, and I had folks from all over the world, and sometimes they're talking about big energy problems, sometimes they're talking about remote villages. And we have to think about energy like that. So a nuclear power plant for some remote village in Brazil is not what we're talking about here. And it kind of sounds silly to even propose that, but it's reality. Okay, well, nuclear it has a purpose, but it doesn't mean it has a purpose for everything. And likewise, we say, well, renewables aren't a good option. Well, for a remote village in Brazil, they might be the best option that there is. I don't know. I'm just saying, but that makes a lot of sense. Renewables, because they have a very low base load, probably not a lot of energy consumption, and you could probably put a few wind farms out there, windmills out there rather, and maybe a couple solar panels, and probably take care of that village. And so, to me, it feels like you can't. In today's climate, you can't say, well, I think this for this situation is great, and for this situation is great, without people going, going off the deep end one way or another. And for me, it's like, well, there's different solutions. What people in New York City need, where you have a dense population, people just on top of each other. That's a very complex energy solution that nuclear probably needs to be a part of. Whereas, out here in the rural parts of Texas, we actually have a nuclear power plant, within a couple miles of where my house is, but maybe a little bit further out than where I'm at. It's fundamentally different. And to me, that's where I think these arguments and these debates. So if you're very pro renewable, I would say, well, let's find the spots that they're most effective, and the spots to be most effective is probably where not Dallas Fort Worth, probably somewhere else.
I completely agree with you. I do think that it's really misplaced. Like when you see like massive utility companies building, we drive to South Florida somewhat often, and we keep passing this huge swath of land in between 95 and the Florida Turnpike, where basically there's setting up solar panels. Now, that's great. Like nobody else is doing anything in the area between those two roads. Like literally nothing would be there except probably alligators. So I'm sure it's a better use of land than nothing, but it's a Florida Power and Light. So it's like a big utility company project. And when you think about how electricity is like one of the like number one things that lifts people out of poverty. And when you think about I'm going to default to Saudi Arabia, which I know a lot about, but there are still remote areas there that don't have consistent electricity. And I completely agree that that renewable projects are probably really excellent for those areas, for self-contained areas like that where they don't necessarily, like, their connection to the larger grid is not reliable. And, if they have their own solar farm or wind farm, they will be getting electricity in a much more reliable way than if they had to depend on, someone from the big national grid to come out and like reconnect them every time it breaks.
No, okay. So now the serious issues are addressed with this article. I've got to point out something. So the author says that let's see here, it's early on. He makes a reference to cats, and that there's other problems didn't seem like such a big deal on closer examination. For example, after I learned that house cats kill billions of birds every year, it put into perspective the nearly 100 million birds killed by wind turbines. Okay. So under the killed billions and the nearly 1 million, it's a hyperlink. So I went to the hyperlink, which is a piece at the Washington Post. Democracy Dies in Darkness, and they're writing about cats. From there, they link to the study from abcbirds.org.
abcbirds.org. Sorry. Oh my God.
The impact of free-ranging domestic cats on wildlife of the United States. And there is a 7-page article on how many birds that the cats are killing. And so I just want to say, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, I'm just an old redneck. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that if you read this with just the least bit of critical eye, you would come to the conclusion that they have zero idea of how many birds are killed by the house cat. Or the domestic range what they call it, the wild cat. It's not a wild, but they call it, they have a term for it, the unhoused cat or unowned cat or whatever. So anyway, I just want to point that out. I had to go look that up because that just seemed billions of birds are killed by cats every year.
I think around here, the outside, we have a lot of outside cats. I think that more birds kill cats than cats kill birds here.
Yeah, free-ranging cats. So
free-range cats.
Yeah, free-range cats. And so
I've got a lot of them. There's one walking by my window right now.
I was just curious, how would one even track how many free-range cats there are? And then how would you track how many birds they've killed? It's a free-range cat. And so
they probably measured one cat and then just, like assumed that every cat kills the same amount and then just multiplied it by the number. Yeah, like I bet they did one of those, like, they extrapolated based on like one data point.
Yeah. We defined unowned cats to include all unowned cats that spend all of their time outdoors. The unowned cat group includes semi-feral cats that are sometimes considered pets. So they were serious about it, but they measured their scat and other stuff, and it was a huge extrapolation. It was just, anyways, I just couldn't believe that that folks got so serious on this. So anyways, there you go, folks. Birds are dying left and right. The wind farms are okay because they're not killing as many as cats are. So let's get rid of the cats. All right. Let's go to Forbes now. We'll have a reliable source here. The one only called OPEC must reassure markets as Aramco moves to become a top oil trader. This is big news, and you've written about it here, obviously. But one of the things, we kind of poke fun at the traders because they want the market to move. When we're talking about that, at least when I'm saying that, I'm talking about the folks who are just kind of like the day trader, the commodity trader. I'm talking about the actual oil companies who have traders. They're kind of a league of themselves, knowing a guy who works for one of them. He kind of talks about the advantages of actually being at a big company and trading oil. It's not the same as the traders who are just trying to move the market around. These guys actually know what's going on. Aramco moving into this space could change the way the game's done.
Oh yeah, I mean, I always kind of assumed that they traded oil just because, like, I figured that
Right.
like, why wouldn't you? They're smart people. So yeah, this article didn't get quite as much traction as I was hoping for, but it's basically based on a Financial Times news report that revealed that where the Aramco said that they are looking to build a huge oil trading unit in London, and they want it to become they want to become one of the top 3 oil traders in the world. I think Trafigura is one,
Yeah.
and Vital are the top 2.
I think
So, and I just saw this and I was like, wow, that could be a huge issue, because there's a lot of overlap between the Saudi oil ministry and Aramco. I mean, not just a lot of overlap. Like basically, Aramco runs the Saudi oil ministry. I mean, like that's basically what happened once Ali Al Naimi, who was the CEO of Aramco, became the oil minister. And they basically just like picked up, his people and took them to the oil ministry. And that's continued now that Khalid Al Fali, who was also a CEO. I mean, I've heard stories like, how would you make it clear that like someone from the oil ministry who's in the OPEC meeting, which is their closed door meetings, so no one knows what goes on there. How do you know he's not, WhatsApping his,
Exactly.
buddy at the oil trading unit in London, telling him like, here's how the meeting's going.
That's exactly what I was going to ask, because my question was, let me ask you like this to kind of maybe narrow it down a little bit. From the time OPEC decides to make an official announcement, how much time? What's the time delay between them making it and Aramco actually knowing that's going to be made?
Well, exactly.
Because if it's anything less, if it's not, if Aramco is finding out before, then they can trade oil, as you're alluding to, obviously, like that, and that's going to give them a huge, huge competitive advantage. And I think you're going to have some folks crying foul. The other thing I'm curious about, Ellen, how much money particularly is at stake here for these trading companies? Because could you see it where Aramco goes, you know what? Fluctuating the market can actually generate so much revenue that we look at oil production differently, or is it just not that much money for them?
That's a good question. I don't think it would look at oil. I don't think they would look at oil production differently necessarily, but I think it would give Aramco a big cushion in
Right.
terms of their profits and their revenue. I think I think they see it in two ways. One, they see it as a way to diversify their sources of revenue, so that they're
Mm-hmm.
not, and like, look, like soybean producers do this too, and corn producers, they're all trading commodities too, and they do it to kind of hedge on, their crops, which is apparently totally legal. So, I don't see it as different from that. But what it also does is it also makes them less dependent on the Saudi state.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think there's a component there where they want to be less dependent on the Saudi state. The question is, will they use the current interdependency as an advantage? And there are actually some, um, you know, uh, so equities trading is much more heavily regulated in terms of insider information than commodities trading. And I did a little research into this. So the Commodity Futures Trading Commission is the regulator in the U.S. Now they're setting their stuff up in London, so I don't know if they're going to be trading on U.S. commodities markets or not. One would assume that they would, because those are also really big markets and they would want to not be involved in those. But the question is could they be accused of misappropriating information? And the question would really, if like say they use something from an OPEC meeting, so the question really is, does OPEC consider it illegal for people to trade on inside information? So like say Mazrui, who's the oil minister of the UAE, has his own trading account and he trades oil on his, for fun or whatever, for kicks.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's sitting in the meeting and he knows he's on his phone, making trades. Is that considered misappropriating information because he's sitting in the meeting and he knows he knows what's happening? So it's kind of the same thing. And so what I was saying is what OPEC should do is OPEC should make clear what they consider misappropriating information and not, so that they can say, look, OPEC representatives or anyone in the meeting has a duty to keep information at all confidential until, we make it public, either by leaking it to a reporter or at the press conference or something like that. Or as soon as you walk out the door, it's all public, but you have to. So I think they need to, if OPEC comes up and makes that statement, that would provide a lot of clarity to the market. Otherwise, everyone's going to be watching Aramco traders to see what they're doing, assuming that maybe they have inside information.
Okay, so I need to try to get him on. Gene Epstein, he used to be at the New York Stock Exchange for years and he wrote for Barron's. And I heard him talk about insider trading. And his theory is that he believes it should be legalized because it actually gives the market the proper signal at the proper time. Whereas if you do not have insider trading, what happens is that Ellen knows that the stock's going to fall, so she's not going to buy anymore, but she can't sell anymore. But that doesn't mean that the stock price is going to climb. And so I'm over here holding it, not knowing that it's going to fall. But if you were to sell off and you had enough shares and the stock started to fall before the news came out, I'd go, oh my goodness gracious, hold on, what's going to the stock here? And I might unload it before I got the bath 3 days later or 2 weeks later, whatever.
So he's saying it would actually make it more fair.
It makes it a lot, yeah, it makes it more fair because we're sitting out essentially, and I try to get on the shows because I don't misrepresent, but my understanding is essentially the people who, if you said, well, you can't trade off it because you have an advantage, I don't think he disagrees with that. The point is that we never have the advantage, and then we can be worse off because the market could keep climbing. The insiders know that the stock's going to plummet, and so they don't buy anymore, so they're not going to take the same beating as we would. Whereas if they started unloading sooner, that would signal the market to unload the stock, and people would start unloading it and go, oh my gosh, it's a fire sale, and they start selling it off. And so that's his position. And I thought
we should get him on and pick his brain about what he thinks about this, because that would be really interesting.
I will.
Let's reach out to him. Get him on the show.
Personally, I've heard him on a few of the shows, but I'll try to reach out to him. But I've thought about that a lot since he said it, because the insider trading, it feels like, oh, that's evil, bad, da da da. But the other thing I would say here is, if you're sitting here on a Tuesday and we all know that OPEC's meeting, and all of a sudden the price of oil starts to fall, as you mentioned, people would assume that OPEC, the Aramco rather, is probably trading off their shares, and that would signal the market, hey, that maybe OPEC's going to ramp up production or whatever. And so I think that could be a good thing for the market. The other thing, though, I guess this is my question, just to kind of clarify, make sure I was clear. Let's just say that they were making profit, $100 million on their oil production, and they could trade and make $100 million on their oil production. I mean, on their other trades. To me, that would be more of a lucrative business, I would guess, because the amount of resources, the time, the energy, the effort.
It's a bunch of guys sitting at computers.
Right, algorithms and stuff, trading and all this stuff. So that's why I was asking if maybe they might see this as a lucrative, as a more lucrative business, because it's a lot less overhead to be involved, and you have such an advantage on the market because you are Saudi Arabia,
Yeah, you're Aramco. I mean, you know. I mean, they know how much oil, and they know how much oil they're producing, or they can at least know how much oil they're producing at any one time. I mean, imagine if they forget OPEC for a minute. Imagine, news came out from Energy Intelligence that Aramco had to shut down production at its Safaniya field, which is a huge offshore field. They had an electrical problem that had to be, and so they had to shut off all their production. And they had they had oil in storage, and they compensated, but that news didn't come out until after the fact. Mm-hmm. Imagine if you're a Aramco oil trader in London,
right?
You might know that happening when it happens, as opposed to like 15, 20 days later when it finally got reported.
No, and that's exactly what I was talking about earlier. The guy that I know works for a big company, a big oil and gas company, he told me that he used some real world scenarios about stuff that they just know, and just because they know, they work with the company, hey, this is going on, and they understand how it's going to impact the market, and then the actual traders themselves, they won't find out until it hits the newswire. And so even if you want to talk about insider trading alone from that standpoint, how do you handle that? Where, okay, well, your company's got a blowout, no one knows about it, not in the middle of the Saudi Arabia desert, but it's going to cut off production for 3 days. Well, you can't trade on that information. I think that's where it really kind of.
No, I think you can. I think you can, and you should trade on that information.
I agree.
Because,
I agree.
No, I agree. How can you not? But it's just interesting because in the case of Saudi Arabia, it's just they control so much production.
Let's turn now to, you got the keyword, production. Wall Street Journal, our favorite publication, they are going after the Shell folks.
Oh God!
This year, I don't know what happened. I don't know if they get invited to a conference or didn't get a phone call returned or whatever, but they are going after them. Shell companies adding ever more wells threaten future of U.S. oil boom. So shale companies adding ever more wells threaten future of U.S. oil boom. That's a weird way to word that title, but essentially they're they're saying the more wells threaten the future of it. And of course, my favorite billionaire Harold Hamm is quoted in here. Ellen, I read this piece, and I gotta say, they referenced the piece in here that we talked about just a few weeks ago, where they openly admitted, probably not to their own realization, that the numbers that they're using are not right. So there's bad information as part of the way that they're doing stuff. That was my first takeaway, but I'll let you go. What was your takeaways?
Yeah, another takeaway I had was when I was looking at watching Twitter discuss this,
Mm-hmm.
someone said, how is it that, like we were just discussing this issue on like Twitter, and now 2 days later it's an article in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, they're monitoring the OOTT hashtag. It seems
Yeah.
like. Yeah, remind me to send you. There's a paper, one of the listeners, and I'll make sure I can share it with everyone. It's public, so I'm pretty sure I can. On the parent-child issue, he put out a few years back, and so I'll double check. I think he's given me permission to share that publicly. But anyways, I'll send it to you. You can look over it. But to me, here's my issue: is there things to be skeptical about the money that's in shale and how it will pan out? I don't think anyone disagrees with that. I think we're all on the same page there. But on the flip side, it's like, well, this is what the market does. The market thinks it has a good idea, and it goes out there and it tries it, and it realizes, okay, well, that didn't work out because the law of what's it, unintentional consequences. So you go, okay, well, that didn't work, so now we go try this. I'm not saying it shouldn't be criticized or not or whatever, but to me, it's kind of like that's kind of missed in all this stuff. Where, hey, yeah, we're trying to figure this out. That's why they did it one way for a while, and that's why they did it another way for a while, and they're going to try it another way, and hopefully they'll get it figured out and make everyone a ton of money. But to me, it feels like, hey, they're not getting it; they're about to collapse, and I don't know. It just the Wall Street Journal just seems to be a lot of doom and gloom right now on shell companies.
Maybe you can explain this a little bit better to me, but how different is this parent-child issue in fracking compared to say like the rule of capture? Like, but I mean, I'm referring like to way back when during the like big boom in like the 20s when everyone was like, I better dig an oil well in my backyard because I don't want my neighbor getting all the oil from I don't want him to get all the oil, so I'm going to dig like my I better put an oil well in my backyard so I get my share. How does this compare to that kind of thing?
Yeah, from my understanding, and I will definitely have to get this paper out to you to look at as well. My understanding is that they're saying that when they drill the child well, it's basically messing up the parent well, and so you're losing whatever projections you had for that first well. When you do this, the second one, it's basically eliminating them. But I heard some discussion the other day. I'm trying to think of where it was. And they were talking about going back in and re-looking at some of these wells that they've drilled over the past few years, and there may be some new techniques to go back and get more oil out of the moving forward in the future. And so, if you say, well, this well didn't hit where we thought it was 20% below or whatever. And again, I got to stress that 20% below does not mean that the well went profitable. It means that, according to the Wall Street Journal themselves, it's just the oil, because that one article we referenced a few months ago, there's other things from the well that they can sell, and they're not calculating that. So the well could still be profitable. But let's say it's 20% off. Remember that conversation we had?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so anyway, I think it was Rystad. It was quoted, and they were talking about one company. Anyway, so I lost my train of thought there, but it's 20% off the mark. So there's been some discussion, and if I can find the article, and I'll send it to you, but about going back, kind of re-looking at how they've drilled these wells, and even here in the Barnett where I live at, I know last year there was a lot of talk about looking at the Barnett Shale now again, with the new fracking and not the new fracking, but the new technology that they've invented since the Barnett was a big boom, and see if they can go back and get some more out of these Barnett wells. So, that's my understanding, is that the child well basically kills off the parent for the most part. But we had to get someone a little bit more technical to explain all of the intricacies there.
I feel like there are so many like double meanings there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's you know, and one of the commentators on this piece pointed out that they picked two poor companies to base it off of: Chesapeake, which is just everyone's whipping boy, and Laredo, which has struggled as well. And so it's like, well, I'm not sure how much that, and that's, I think to me, that's always when you come back to these reports is, how accurate are these reports? Because again, I got to say this again, the Wall Street Journal in this piece, they linked to it in this article, and we talked about it on the show, and I'm trying to see if I can find the quote in here. They said, oh gosh. Anyways, they quoted one of the companies as saying, hey, yeah, we missed our mark, but we have the other condensates and whatever it was. I can't remember. It was natural gas. And they felt like that made them profitable. And they didn't release their numbers, so you didn't actually know. But it's like, well, based upon this, they could. So, I don't know. The journal, I don't know, Ellen. Tell me if I'm wrong. It just feels like they're kind of Parsley Energy. There it is, Parsley Energy. It doesn't feel like they're really trying to. It feels like they got the narrative they're pushing here. Is that just me, or I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think that they try to find holes in anything, and some of their holes are not really holes. They're just kind of maybe possible holes, but they present them as like big deals when it's like, well, there may be something there, but the data doesn't really back it up. But they're kind of picking data to try to create this is an issue. I mean, look, they take these reporters and they assign them to like this like you're supposed to investigate shale companies. So what do you think's going to happen when you poke and poke and poke?
And here's the quote for the listener's sake, the article that they referenced that I was talking about. Parsley is on track to miss its Midland well forecast for every year from 2014 to 2017 by an average of 25%, according to the journal's analysis. This is a quote from Parsley. Quote, responsible evaluation of the data shows that Parsley's historic well production has been consistent with exceptions set forth in our public materials, said a Parsley spokeswoman. When calculating this is back to the journal now. When calculating its estimates, Parsley includes other valuable hydrocarbons that come out of wells, such as ethane. In its analysis, Rystad does not include those hydrocarbons, known as natural gas liquids, because they aren't actually accurately captured in available public data. So
Parsley, like, hey, yeah, we always use like condensates and stuff, and then Rystad's like, no, we will not use it.
Right. Well, yeah. So you could be missing your oil by 25%, but theoretically making money because you have other stuff that outperforms or whatever, or at least breaks even, or maybe you still lose money, but it's 5% instead of 25%. And so for me, that's the frustration with these pieces is, well, I don't know. I mean, shale companies, there's definitely a lot of problems there. I'm not trying to deny that, but we don't have all the information. We're trying to piece it together and saying this is that. And I think my position on this is pretty clear. I know I've told you, I think offline, maybe online as well, is that I think the long-term shale play is more of the ExxonMobils where they can produce it, they can pipe it, and they can refine it. They seem to be a lot more immune to the whims of the market than some of these companies who don't have that capacity. So I think that's where it's heading long-term. But we do have to figure out how to drill it and spacing and stuff like that. And that's just part of any industry, Ellen, is, hey, we think this is work. Oh, no, it doesn't work. Now we think this is work. Oh, no, it doesn't work. And so, I don't know. Maybe I'm too optimistic on the market.
Well, let's see. Maybe next week the Wall Street Journal will have an article saying shale companies beat expectations because they include condensates and other liquids. And it'll be like big news. And be like, we talked about that last week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm holding my breath. I just want a formal apology for all the house cats out there accused of killing billions of birds around the United States.
Birds, yeah. Wow. I completely missed that too. I was like so angry about the whole well, I know this because I talk to people. I had conversations with people. Well, have you ever talked to a utility company about how they can source nuclear energy? I mean, no. I had conversations with people. So now I understand everything about energy.
Yeah, the bird thing sent me on a rabbit trail to put it quickly. So,
oh boy,
okay, Ellen, it is of course Monday when we're recording this. It should be out today or tomorrow. So where will you be this week?
Well, right now I'm up on Chatham House with an interview I did with them about the future of the Saudi economy. So you can check that out, and I will hopefully be in a publication called the Cairo Review
Oh yeah.
later this week with a piece looking at the future of Neom, which is that fantastical city that the Saudis are going to build, and what kind of model they could possibly use to make it productive. This piece originally started with a reference to one of the, well, some people would say this is one of the greatest movies of all time. And of course, now I'm blanking on the title of the movie, which always have not Casablanca, a baseball movie.
Field of Dreams?
Yes, Field of Dreams, because I called it the Field of Dreams mentality. I managed to, up until the very last draft when the editor decided to remove all of my carefully placed movie and literary references. But so I do call it the Field of Dreams piece.
If you build it, they will come.
If you build it, they will come. Except maybe they won't.
Maybe not.
So keep an eye out for that.
Okay, good deal. We had a debate today on the Text One Guys podcast, so that will be out on eminent domain. So that will be out today or tomorrow. So be sure to check that out if you're of interest in that discussion. And so that's where I'll be. Ellen, anything else before we get out here today?
No, we'll see all of you next week.
Yep, listeners, thank you so much. I'll talk to you next week.